Can you believe it? It's finally here. Today is June 11th, the first day of Euro 2020.
Go!
My name is Brendan Dunlop, and I am thrilled to bring you wall-to-wall coverage of one of the most exciting and thrilling sporting events in the world. It's been 3 long years since we've had a major international soccer tournament, and this will be unlike any other. 24 nations competing across 11 countries in Europe for the right to be holding the trophy at Wembley come July 11th. The great thing about these expanded tournaments is we get to see some nations that aren't usually at these big events. Nations like North Macedonia, Scotland, Finland, and the Netherlands. We're going to see some great soccer for the next month, and you can see this show on YouTube every single match night and listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe now. One of the things that makes Euro 2020 very exciting is I now get to call a longtime friend in the industry a colleague, Miss Laura Armstrong. Welcome to Headers and Footers.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited that you're here and that we get to do this for the next month.
I'm very excited too. We've always enjoyed talking soccer together, and I'm really glad that we get to do it for a Toronto Star audience now in a tournament that really I think is going to be captivating. And you know, so much in the world has changed in a year, and so much in the football world has changed as well, which makes things, I think, very exciting for a tournament that is often unpredictable. But when you've got 24 teams playing across 11 countries at the tail end of a pandemic, I think that's the, the definition of unpredictable.
I can't get over how excited I am for this tournament. I feel like I wasn't as, paying as much attention, even though it was before the pandemic began, to qualifying, just because there was a lot of other things going on. And then last year in Nations League play, even though we all had a lot of time, I guess, to watch TV because we weren't really doing much else, there were other things going on in the world for sure by 2020. So now I'm excited to sort of get reintroduced to these teams and see who's going to win it, because I have no idea who that's going to be.
Well, your coverage in the Star has been great, and I just want to clarify something, as you can be a character reference for me here. To any Toronto Star readers that read my introductory piece where I talked about my travels to Paris for the Euro 2016 final and my love of Portugal because it is the birthplace of my mother, that I'm not an incredibly biased Portuguese journalist. I just like some support there in that.
No, you are not an incredibly biased Portuguese journalist. On the side, you are just an incredibly passionate Portuguese fan and soccer fan in general. Hey, anybody who knows me knows I am an England fan, and generally I actually usually ditch them at some point in the tournament because the Netherlands, in half these major tournaments sort of jumps ahead and does something better. And my mom's side is Dutch. So, we all have our roots and we'll see how it goes. But I think you, like me, tend to be maybe even harder on the countries we love rather than supporting them.
But in this regard, I'm not biased. I'm very clear-headed. So let's talk favorites. I look at Portugal and I can't not have them as the winner at the end here. I honestly think that Portugal is just such a complete team. But there are some other favorites. I think that there are some issues that Portugal may have, but I feel like I should just pull the Band-Aid off and say that this team is so much better than the team that would have gone to Euro 2020 had this been played last year when it was scheduled. And I don't think Portugal's ever been in a situation where they're so complete from front to back that Fernando Santos, I believe, doesn't actually know his best 11, but that isn't a problem. That's because he has so many options, because the side is so versatile. They can tinker and cater to actual opponents. And you look at the group of death, when they were drawn at the end of 2019, I thought Portugal would be lucky to escape and as a third place team, because they'd be beating each other up, that they might not even, be able to get out of the group as the third place side. And now I'm looking at them as I think favorites to win it.
I think favorites to win it is a little too far, frankly.
Okay.
But I think France is going to win it, and it's not an interesting selection. It's just that you run down that roster and you think to yourself, how does this team get beat? They have so many stars and so many guys who can just change a game. That being said, when you talk about the ultimate guy who can change a game, it's Cristiano Ronaldo. And I think that it's really interesting to listen to you talk about Portugal in the way that you're talking about them, because you just spent, 45 seconds to a minute talking about Portugal, and you didn't even mention Cristiano Ronaldo. I think that's a step in the right direction for the country. I think that the problem with Portugal can be that they play too much through this, masterful player. And the fact that they are far more balanced, even as you said, this year versus last year, is a huge step forward for them. I think that they'll finish second in the group. I think they'll finish second behind France. And I don't actually think that Germany is going to be as big of a player in this Euros 2020 than we maybe thought. Obviously, there are good players in that team. They have a lot of talent, but I think that when you talk about Lowe, I don't think he knows what his best 11 is, and I don't think that's a good thing versus, it as a compliment for Portugal. So that's definitely going to be the group that you should watch in the group stage, in my opinion, in terms of the favorites. But who is actually going to be emerge from Group F and be the team that I think this team's going to win it is going to be a super interesting battle.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that Germany are the first big team to crash out, will be the first big team to crash out, because I think they're going to have the hardest time. I think that Jogi Löw doesn't agree. I agree with you. He doesn't know his best 11. I also think that we've seen in the past, they have a tendency to, play to their best, and they're not going to have the time in the group stage to kind of figure that out, I think. And you don't have the same kind of engines as the past. I mean, defensively, I think Mats Hummels is good enough to play at this level.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at some of the young attackers that he'll be going up against in this group stage, and Joao Felix for Portugal, Kylian Mbappe for France. And I think any of his flaws will be exposed in those games very, very early. And if Timo Werner can, replicate the form that he had playing in the Bundesliga, with maybe some players in an environment he might be more comfortable in than we saw at Chelsea this season, then that could put them over the top as well. I think Kai Havertz has kind of hit the right form in his play. So I do think that Germany are dangerous. Certainly not a team that these other two nations can take lightly. But I do want to ask you about France, though, because my hesitancy in looking at the World Cup champions and giving them the favorites tag here, which they do have from the bookies, is there's always so many questions with the change room, and they've really destabilized it by bringing in Karim Benzema, who on paper, I think, fully deserves to be there. However, it's the issues in the change room involving other players and the scandal with the former French international that I think really destabilizes the room. Because you and I have been in locker rooms in all sports to know that what's said in front of the media isn't always what's actually going on behind the scenes, and that these are also workplaces. And unlike our offices, they're living with each other and on top of each other day in and day out.
Yeah, I do wonder the conversations that Didier Deschamps had with his other players. Was this a conversation in the dressing room? Was it something that everybody sort of came around and said, this is a guy who is going to make our team better, and therefore we will put the rest of, all of these sort of off-field issues that have happened in the past aside? All that being said, even if he had that conversation, the minute something starts going wrong for France, and the problem is that there are, definitely hurdles right from the get-go, I feel like this dressing room could fall apart. And I completely agree with you. I think that that's going to be the biggest stumbling block for this team. And I think it's not unusual for that to be the case, particularly when you have a team like France where it's all big names. Every single player basically on that team, and can you get them to work as a unit? We've seen France struggle to do that in the past, and bringing Benzema in is definitely, I think he's going to be an X factor one way or the other. He's either going to be the best player that France has, and Didier Deschamps is going to look like a genius for bringing him in and for somehow managing to find that off-field balance, or it's going to be a complete disaster. It'll be fun for any non-French fan to watch, potentially.
We don't have the time to go into the story, but you can just Google, if you're interested, viewers and listeners, Google Karim Benzema and Mathieu Valbuena. Quickly, though, talking about the room still in France, Kylian Mbappe already angry with the media for how he's being portrayed and for the criticism. So I feel like, and this is just in the tune-ups, so they're already starting, I feel like, with some animosity and perhaps some fireworks in the change room. And for France, that always seems to be, what bites them. The earlier that starts, the earlier their tournament ends. Is the favorites tag a good thing for England? As an England supporter,
no, never.
As someone who knows
England
the game as well as you do, how do you feel about them having the second favorites tag?
Don't love it. I much prefer flying under the radar and maybe, surprising people, but England doesn't really surprise people either, to be honest. I think that any English fan coming into this tournament is probably thinking to yourself, maybe the most optimistic approach is like hopeful, but also realistic, cautiously optimistic that maybe this team can put it together. I think that the worrisome thing for most English fans is whether or not Gareth Southgate can use his attack the way that he needs to be using it. He's got a ton of attacking players. And I actually think it might be a matter of can they outscore their defense at this point? So and it'll be interesting, but I don't think that English fans do very well with favorites tags. I think that just leads to a lot of maybe setting yourself up for failure.
As someone who's worked with English expats for much of my professional media career, I don't think that England fans deal with tournaments, well at all, let alone pressure and favorites tag. They just don't deal well in watching their team in tournaments. So can agree with that.
Yeah. No.
Talking about favorites, one nation that never seems to be discussed in all of the other pods and reviews is Belgium, who come in as the number one team in the world, if you believe the Soda Pop FIFA World Rankings. But I'm looking at this side, and I think that they're going to have a very tough time, progressing through the knockout stages. What do you think of the Red Devils?
I think you're right about I think if they can progress through the knockout stages, I think that they're going to maybe find their stride, right? They still have some guys who, the names that Lukaku. I mean, even, I don't know. How do we talk about Hazard at this point? Like, how do we talk about them, right? Like, he's a guy that Roberto Martinez seems to think is going to be the guy. And if he's able to come back and have a 3-week stint of being the guy that we all knew, then this team has a genuine chance. But the problem is that I don't think that they have a player who can replace what he does for this country. And so if he's not the guy who's stepping up, you have a problem. You don't have that cog in the midfield who is going to be able to feed a player like Lukaku and set him on his way. So it's going to be interesting to see how Belgium fares. I know that people have been calling them a dark horse. I don't agree with that tag. I still think that, the team has so much quality if they're sort of firing on all cylinders. The problem is that I feel like we've seen them not fire on all cylinders, and they're sort of getting close to this window of this golden generation shutting.
I agree. And here's the headline for you. Thorgan Hazard will have a bigger impact on Belgium's success at Euro 2020 than Eden Hazard.
I would love to see it.
But I think they're going to have their hands full, which is also what I think about Italy. And I feel as though I might be in the minority here because I look at this side and they don't have the names that jump off the paper as Italian sides of the past. However, they also seem like they might be the most complete team. And to me, they remind me a lot of Portugal's side from Euro 2016. Not the names that jumped off the page that you might expect, but a side that know each other well and a side that also play domestically. I think there's a familiarity and a chemistry there that they come out of the gates with that a lot of other nations don't.
Particularly over the past year when national teams haven't spent as much time together. I know that the situation is different in Europe than it is here, and these teams have played together a little bit more than maybe, the Canadian team has, but I still think that cohesiveness is a very difficult thing to find. And I think that Italy does seem to have it. That doesn't mean that they don't have anything to prove. They missed the 2018 World Cup. Their fan base is one of the most demanding fan bases in soccer, in my opinion. And I think the favorites tag is deserved, but I certainly don't think that they're one of those teams that you can say, yeah, finals or nothing.
I can't wait. Well, Laura, thanks so much. I really look forward to covering Euro 2020 with you here on Headers and Footers. We'll be on Twitter Spaces as well. And this is going to be a really fun month.
Can't wait.